everybody. I wanted to talk to you today about something that I've been thinking about on and off for a while, and I think it's a really fun, interesting topic, and I'd love to know what your opinions are on this. But it's whether being an indie writer is considered cool. And I suppose I first started thinking about this because I shared something on my personal Facebook page. I probably shared something from my Emma Rosen Books page onto my personal one. And one of my friends commented, "Oh, you're an indie writer, that's so cool. I'd love to be an indie something." And it really got me thinking about this term indie and what it means, but also people's perceptions of self-publishing and indie writers. And I think it's such an interesting topic. Now, I prefer the term indie because I feel that it's more associated with kind of working with freelancers and having it more as like a business thing, but not everybody sees it that way. Being an indie writer and being a self-published writer are really interchangeable terms, and it's a massive grey area. But it's a term that I prefer. So I do tend to, if I say I am an indie writer, I'll happily be called a self-published writer, but that's how I describe myself. And so, yeah, the whole idea that that's something that could be seen as cool is interesting because I really wouldn't think that being an indie or a self-published writer is cool at all. Because to me, I think that I think there's a stigma associated to self-publishing, because when ebooks really took off about 20 years ago or so, and people were able to just upload their books really easily and turn them into a book, a product, there were lots of people who did that who maybe hadn't even ever had anybody see that manuscript, let alone it see a professional editor or even beta readers or anything. It may have been this passion project that they wrote, nobody even knew they ever wrote it, and then they put it online, and like that is so exciting. But obviously that would also lead to work that was out there that arguably might be poorly edited, or the story doesn't work well, or whatever it may be. I mean, now is not the time to get into like what is art and that kind of thing. But yeah, I appreciate that there was a time, and it still happens of course, where people self-publish work that people may feel is not good enough, and that's a really difficult kind of concept as well, that whole good enough thing. But also print on demand enabled people, I mean, it's amazing, it's allowed people to self-publish their work so much more easily. Of course, self-publishing existed before these things, but not having to store loads of print books, which is a bit of a kind of a preconception, I suppose, as well, of people who are self-published, that you have like thousands of books stored in a corner of your room. I do have some books stored. But anyway, this idea, you didn't have to do that anymore, and you didn't have to distribute them, and print on demand is amazing. But of course it also leads to people being able to create files, stick them online, and yeah, some of those arguably may not be good enough in some people's perceptions. And I think that led to this kind of stigma surrounding people who self-publish, that, oh, I don't want to read self-published work because some of it's rubbish. Well, arguably some of all books are rubbish, depending on your taste. And I've definitely read traditionally published work that I think is not that great, and I've read self-published work that is amazing. But I suppose it just made it easier for work to have not been properly edited and worked with and all that kind of stuff, which I suppose is why people hold that idea, which is a shame, but it is what it is, I suppose. And I guess for people, if you buy a book that has been traditionally published, then a gatekeeper has judged that book good enough, and so therefore it should be of a certain standard. So I just think that there is this thing attached to, if I say I'm a self-published writer or an indie writer, I think some people don't necessarily know what I mean when I say indie writer, so maybe that's why it's considered a little bit cooler. But when I say I'm a self-published writer, that people may think that that's a bit embarrassing. So I was very surprised that somebody might think that that was cool. And I think it's really interesting when you look at the world of self-publishing and indie writing, that when you compare that to other creative industries, particularly if you look at music, which I think is where the kind of coolness of the indie term comes from. Now in music, the word indie means something slightly different. In general, an indie band or an indie musician is somebody who's represented by an independent label. So I probably wouldn't call myself an indie writer if I worked with an independent publisher, but if I worked with an independent music label, I would call myself an indie musician, which I think is really interesting. So a lot of indie musicians are represented by small indie labels, and that's where we got all the like huge amount of like grunge bands and punk bands and all that stuff. But it does also include people who independently publish their music in the same way that an indie writer publishes their music. They've done it themselves. They have put their music out there. And again, right now with the internet, there's so much possibility for that. I mean, when I used to write songs when I was a teenager, and I was so passionate about that. If I'd have had the abilities that people have now to be able to share their music, I would have been all over that. I would have had my music on YouTube and Spotify and iTunes and all of that stuff. I think it's amazing. And now I'm not so interested in pursuing a music career. Well, I'm not interested at all. But the fact that you can do that and you can self-publish your music now in that way is just amazing, because when I was into it all that time ago, you couldn't really do it. You just played in venues and hoped someone heard you and liked it. So I think that's really cool. And you get amazing bands like Walk Off the Earth who put their music on YouTube. It absolutely took off and went viral, and now they're represented by a major label. So they would have been considered an indie band, and they didn't have a label at all. They put their own music out there online. But yeah, you would still call a band like Oasis an indie band. It came from the indie scene, or something like the Red Hot Chili Peppers or something. They're indie, you know. But I think that's where the cool thing came from, because when indie and alternative music became mainstream in the 90s and in the 80s as well, it became cool. And so that term indie is sort of, people see it as a part of that, I think. But I also think it's really interesting when you look at, so if I said I was an independent musician, I was going to studio, I was paying for studio time, I was creating my own albums, you know, having them made, I was releasing my music online and making music videos, paying music directors to make music videos and putting that on YouTube and all of that, I think that would be seen as cool. Whereas I think that being an indie writer and doing the same kind of thing, you know, having my books designed and edited and distributing them, I don't think it holds the same amount of cool. I think that's interesting. But also if you look at something like somebody who's an artist, a lot of artists do work independently. Some of them have agents, some of them might be kind of, I believe I'm not that sure with art, but I think they kind of work with galleries, and that gallery might handle their distribution a bit and that kind of thing. But a lot of artists produce their art and then they arrange exhibitions, or they might sell online, have, you know, their social media accounts and all of that, and that's how they produce their art. So yeah, they might have an agent. I think it's a little bit rarer with artists. I might be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, because I don't know that for sure. But now herein lies another facet, I think, to the argument, because if you went to, let's say, that little, I don't know if it still does it, but that market outside Montmartre in Paris, where you have all the artists sitting in there, like around the cafes, and there's all these beautiful paintings of Paris, and it's such a cool, vibey place. I don't know if it's still like that. And you buy a painting and you put it on your wall, and it reminds you of your trip to Paris, and you love that little piece of art, and you met the artist and you absolutely love it, and you're supporting that small business, you're supporting that creative. And I think the thing is, you look at that painting and you know if you like it, and then you can put it on your wall, you know you're still going to enjoy it. With music and with indie music, I think again it's something similar. In general, if you choose to buy a song, well, you might stream it these days, and so therefore it's subscription model, so that's different. But if you choose to buy an album, the chances are you will have heard the lead songs off of the album, or you'll have listened to a sample of it. You know what you're in for. You might have seen the band on YouTube, you know what they sound like. Every album I've ever bought, I already know a couple of the songs on the album, so there might be some that I don't like that much, but I know I like a couple of them. So again, you're not you're getting, you know what you're getting. I think with a book it's different. I think with a book you get a cover and a blurb, and what's inside may not be anything like that. And also the investment in time. If I listen to an album, sure, it might take me an hour to listen to it. If I look at painting, it takes me a couple of minutes. If I read a book, that might take me like 10 or 15 hours. And if that book is tripe, I'm going to be really annoyed. So again, I think that if you see an artist and you don't think they're very good, they're an independent artist painting on the street, or they're painting, you go to a gallery and you think that painting's rubbish, I don't like it. You don't have to buy it. You've looked at it and you've moved on. But when you consume a book, you've made that choice to buy it. And so if you don't like it, then, as I said, that gives some irritation and some kind of prejudice and disdain, I think. I could be completely wrong, but I think those are the things that kind of work together that mean that being an indie writer is not as cool as being an indie musician. Or if I said I was an artist, I don't think an artist would call themselves an independent artist, just say I'm an artist, or I'm a freelance artist. And whether that means that I make art for commissions, or I produce fine art and then exhibit it, and all of that, I don't think they would call themselves an indie in the same way. But I think if I said I'm an artist, people would think very differently of me to if I say I am a self-published writer or I am an indie writer. And I think that's really interesting, because effectively we're all doing the same thing, other than the indie bands who are represented by small labels. That is different. But yeah, I think that's where that kind of thing comes from. I'm not using the term indie writer because I want to be cool. But I think it's really interesting, that perception, and whether I really do think that there is a stigma attached to writing that isn't attached to people making their own music and putting it out there. I think that scene is really cool. And the same of painting and trying to sell your paintings. Unless somebody's seen your work and thinks it's rubbish and is like, oh yeah, well done, your album. I think in general people think it's really cool that you're doing that and you're putting your creativity out there. And I don't think writing has that same feel. I just think it's interesting. I'd love to know what you guys think. So yeah, let me know in the comments. But I'm proud of what I do. I don't think I'm cool, but I am very proud of what I do and of what other independent writers do. Just think it's very interesting, these kind of perceptions. Anyway, leave me a comment and don't forget to hit like, and please do subscribe for more videos like this one. Take care.